Yeah, so for me, camp ministry has looked a little bit different. Growing up as a young guy, actually, we didn't really have like a go-to camp for us to go to as kids in our neck of the woods in Manitoba. And so we didn't really actually grow up with that sort of camp culture where you get to go to camp every summer. It's just part of what you do. So my story with camp ministry, there's a couple that I think of growing up, but really for me, it starts actually when we moved here to BC. And the first time we stepped foot on the property at Sunnybrae, our minds were blown just at just kind of the facility and the location. But then as we started to meet people and get to know sort of the goal and the vision and the mission of that camp, it became impactful very, very quick. And so I'm going to get to some sort of camp lessons and stuff in a minute. But first of all, a funny story through camp ministry. I think probably just lots and lots and lots of stories, and all as a youth leader, with Bob as an intern, or of myself as a youth pastor. And so I got to experience a lot of youth doing silly, stupid things, and often partaking in those silly, stupid things. But I just remember the early sort of years of us being here. Tim at the camp had an earth ball, as well as we did here at the church. And by this story, you're going to realize why we don't use it anymore. But basically, it's just big inflatable ball, like 8 feet tall, just this massive, massive thing. And so just imagine with me for a moment, a guy like myself of my size versus, say, Aaron Spence. That is a recipe for disaster. And so some of the funniest moments were just Aaron and myself, or Wade Bowler, just kind of larger individuals running as fast as we could against this thing to see who could fly the other person the furthest. And so that's just an awesome memory, specifically at Sunnybrae. And then just, I remember one time specifically, like I was watching on the side, and you get all these youth leaders from all different parts of BC, and sometimes, I don't know what it is that you just feel like you have to go to these camps and improve something. And so usually at the other end of that person proving something is some poor little girl or skinny person getting absolutely floored. And I remember seeing lots of bodies fly all over the field at Sunnybrae. So that's just one memory I have that's just fun and silly and somewhat dangerous. So I'm glad we don't do that anymore, actually. So good call, Tim, on canceling that one. But like I said, camp is so impactful, and I've just had so many awesome moments. In fact, I just had lunch with an ex-student today who we were reflecting, and there was a time when he was a teenager, just after chapel, just the Spirit of God met with him in a really significant way. And it's just so neat to see God moving. And one thing I love about camp is it's kind of like an incubator for a week. You go there and you're with the same people every day, and you're having fun, and there's a ton of community, and you're hearing the gospel multiple times a day. And I think that God just really uses those focused times to just press in on students' hearts and on leaders' hearts that are there, serving as camp counselors or cabin leaders or assaults. And again, as a youth pastor in the region, it's kind of become tradition to just go out and visit those people as much as we can throughout the summer. And in all those times, and in setting up for May Camp and being part of that, and even speaking at various camps, one thing I've just learned is that God is just so in control of everything that's going on. And there's so many moving pieces to camp ministry. And just the different kinds of people that he brings through, and the different students from different walks of life. But I've just seen it become so important, and so just such an impact for myself and for our students and for other students across the region. And it's too bad I didn't have that growing up, but I see how good it is now, and I just encourage our kids all the time to just get plugged into a Sunnybrae or into a Faith Mission or a Garden Lake or wherever it may be, to just get involved, because God really, really uses camp ministry, and it's really impacted me even in my adulthood. So it's been really neat.
So I spent many years, my church when I was young had a camp that they were part of called Camp Chestermere. My parents volunteered, so I was there lots over the summer, even when I was young. They would just drag me along, and Mom would be in the kitchen, Dad would be helping out in other places. It wasn't probably till I was a CIT and then a junior counselor that I had a chance to experience some of the the fun that goes on at camp. And one of my favorite stories of camp is every evening we'd have a campfire down by the lake, and one evening, for whatever reason, the job wasn't clearly assigned, so one guy went down, built a nice pile of wood, and poured some gas on the fire, and then he left. Somebody else came down and looked at the fire, added a few more pieces, and threw a little bit more gas on. One more guy came in, and then finally, I can't remember who lit the fire, but when he lit the fire, he threw the match on, the fire literally blew apart. There was wood flying everywhere. And there was just lots of fun stuff like that happened at camp. Camp is an awesome place just to go and work as a young person. And I have a few stories of the old camp truck that I'm not going to entertain you with, but we had lots of fun working at camp, I'll say it like that. One of the biggest lessons for me at camp was just the power of God. I think I've said it before, where camp was the first place that I personally experienced God, where I personally prayed for something and would see God respond. And I remember invariably every summer there would be a cabin that was, you'd have your staff meetings early in the morning, and you'd come in and just say, man, what a crazy night. These kids are terrible. We had kids from some pretty rough places in Calgary. And it was amazing how God softened hearts over the course of a week. And I can't remember how many times you would see a cabin like that. At the end of the week, you'd see almost every kid in the cabin give their life to Christ. And it was just amazing to see God at work, his love for kids, and kids even from hard places. I remember kids crying because their parents were coming to pick them up, and it was a hard place to go back to. And one of the story that actually just learned about not that long ago, I was at camp for probably 5 or 6 years as a CIT and junior counselor over several summers. Years later, I was at a church, and somebody came to that church who said, I went to Camp Chestermere as a kid, and we talked, and she was one of those kids that came out of a tough environment, and her life wasn't exactly perfect how she wanted it to be, but God had God had saved her, and she was coming to church for the first time in a long time, wanting to get her life back on track. And I was just amazed to see how God not only did a work in the summer, but continued that work over the course of 15, 20 years when I bumped into this kid again. So for me, camp always represents a place where God has done a lot of powerful work. And for me, I had a chance to visit Camp Chestermere a couple summers ago and just remember all that God did in my own heart in that place. So for me, camp is one of the lessons I learned at camp is God is incredibly powerful. So that's it.
So my favorite or funniest camp story, hard to know which ones to pick. So my own personal camp experience, I was sent to camp when I was about 8. It was the week we were moving from Campbell River, BC to Barrie, Ontario. My parents decided it would be best to send me to keep me out of all the chaos. I'm sure at the time it seemed like a great parenting decision. It left me permanently scarred towards camp. But the only thing I remember is making a ceramic owl and not being able to fully paint it or something like that because I left halfway through the week. Anyway, from about grade 8 till almost the end of high school, I did not return to camp, probably largely because of the impressions of that one. But the first church we pastored, small little church in the Kootenays, part of pastoring the church, I inherited the running of a Bible camp for a couple weeks every summer. It was a little United Church camp in Rock Creek. If you've ever driven number 3 highway, you've driven right by it. And the United Church wasn't running kids camps anymore, so we got to rent it and ran a camp kind of for the fellowship churches in the Kootenays. A little lake, very rustic, kind of rundown kind of a camp. And me as a 23, 24, 25-year-old kind of in that zone running this little Bible camp. I had other help, but I got to be the director, which is probably a way more glamorous title than what I actually managed to pull off. But we had lots of great times running that camp. Lynn and I, with little kids, we'd haul Marissa and Isaac as babies out there and do that for a couple weeks. Every year, I would take kind of one of the rougher cabins of boys, was sort of part of my duty in terms of running the camp and games and all that kind of stuff. So we had lots of crazy, wacky times. I was telling Andrew, I'm not sure 100% if I should tell this story or not. It wasn't funny at the time. It's become funnier as I look back. But one year, one of the boys from out of town, I think it was a cousin of one of the kids in one of the churches, brought a camera. This is before digital cameras, and decided to take pictures. I'm sure some lovely mother out there thought this would be great for little Billy or Johnny, whatever his name was, to remember his camp. The other boys in the cabin thought that was a pretty hilarious thing, that he brought this camera. Unbeknownst to me, one day decided they would take pictures of each other's backsides. Didn't tell anyone this. I didn't find this out until after camp was ended, and this poor kid went home. Mom developed the film, and you can only imagine the phone call I received as the director of this camp. Thankfully, it was a simpler, purer time, I would say, and we were able to clear up the mess. But it was definitely one of the more memorable times. The other thing I remember is every year or every camp actually, one of the traditions was each cabin would act out a Bible story, and trying to get grade 4, 5, 6 boys to take a serious approach to this was always a little bit tricky. But the favorite one that we ever did was the Ascension of Jesus. We managed to find the smallest kid. We found a rope and a plank, and we built this massive platform that he was kind of perched on. And again, a simpler, purer time, because I don't think there's any safety equipment, but we managed to cause this young kid to ascend into heaven. In other words, we winched him up into a tree on this little plank, and he disappeared from sight. It was pretty epic. Probably the thing that I most came to appreciate about camp was the opportunity to share the gospel as it's being lived out. And so the thing I appreciate about camp to this day is the camp counselors who actually can not just communicate the message, but live it out in front of these kids for a week. And many of them never get to see that. And it reminds me of a verse in Philippians chapter 1 that says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ." And I think that's what happens at camp. Counselors who love Jesus and love kids get to go and share the good news of Christ and then live it out in an authentic way, 24 hours a day for 7 or 5 days, whatever it might be, so that kids can actually see the difference the gospel makes. And I think that is a fantastic thing. So while my own experience was not the most stellar, I am a wholehearted supporter of camp ministries. I think it's awesome, mainly for that reason. Just the gospel lived out is a powerful thing. So there's my stories for today.
Well, my funniest camp story, I got a lot. So maybe like some of the other guys are saying, I didn't really go to camp much as a kid. We did sort of one camp weekend. And actually, I should back up from that because that's not actually true. I remember, like just barely do I remember, whenever I was really young, my parents would have directed camps. And I remember very little about it, but we lived in Ireland, and my parents would actually take kids from Ireland all the way down to the south of England and do weeks of camp there. And so there's all kinds of stories that they have of, they would take kids on the underground in the tube in London and lose a kid. They did that one time, and he had the wherewithal to get on the next train and then catch up with them. So it worked out okay, but there's all kinds of stories. I remember having German measles somewhere in the midst of that and being left behind while my parents went to camp. But I always remember, and I'd actually like to go, if it's still there, I'd like to go see it, because I just remember this being epic, where there was some kind of brick wall, and in my mind it was probably 20 feet tall. In reality it probably wasn't, but there was holes in the brick wall, purposeful holes, so that you could climb up, and then on the other side of the wall was a water tank. And I always remember this camp, they had big water fights, but that was, like, I just about remember that. So it's almost so dim, if I can put it that way, that I'm not sure where the truth is from what my imagination has dreamed that up to be. But very vague memories of that. So that would be my first camp experience. I think for me, coming to Canada, a big part of that already was to do camp ministry. And so I directed camps and taught at camps and counseled and did a whole pile of things. And so there's just a lot of stories, a lot of really neat moments. But in Northern Ontario, Melissa and I had wanted to do camps for some of the kids that were coming to our youth programs. And these kids were not from Christian homes, so it was just a neat experience just to spend 5 days, 6 days with these kids, because they just never had been in that Christian environment. And so that was a really neat opportunity. Lots of interesting stories along the way, lots of funny stories along the way. And just this camp was pretty rustic. It had no hydro, so it was everything was either propane in terms of the stoves, and then in terms of lights, it was all generators. So just lots of stories that came out of that. Like one year there was a skunk under a cabin, and so we just told the kids, like, if you get sprayed, because one kid who wanted to take a picture of the skunk, so we're just saying, hey, if you get sprayed, you got to go home, not as a punishment, because we just got no way to clean you up. Anyway, there'd been a kid, and he was a neat kid, a simple kid. He had some challenges, shall we say. Anyway, and he was from a fairly conservative home, fairly protective parents, but yet it was a big deal that he had been allowed to come to camp. Anyway, unfortunately, he wet the bed, wet his clothes, and it was getting near the end of the week. We didn't have any washing machines, but the smell was getting bad, and so we're like, we're gonna have to hand wash some stuff here. Well, we hand washed the stuff, hung it out to dry, and of course the rain came, and so now this kid who didn't have many clothes, now they're all wet. What are we gonna do? So we came up with this brilliant idea of putting them in the oven, which was great until it wasn't, as they say. So his underwear, which was tidy-whities, we put it on an old cookie sheet, shoved it in. But I promise you, we were being diligent, keeping an eye on it. We knew this was not a great plan. And you got to imagine, we were tired. It was probably second week of camp. So this is probably funnier for us than it was for you hearing this story. But anyway, by the time all was said and done, we had little burn lines in his underwear, and we had to fess up to his mom. And that was not a fun moment to have to fess up to say, this is what went on, this is what we tried to do, and we wrecked his underwear. So that was definitely fun. There's all kinds of, as I say, fun stories, all kinds of neat stories, just of where God was in control. That camp, we ran it for about 8 years, and it was just neat opportunities. I remember one time, it would have been fairly stressful. Just getting it come together. Things were pretty last minute, just by the nature of it. Most of these kids that came didn't pay, and most of them didn't register. So it was kind of, you would go to the kid if it was the week before, and it was only going to be 20 people, 25 people, most counselors and kids. So it was a pretty small camp. But I just remember often the week before, you might have had 5 kids and 4 leaders kind of thing, and it always made itself up to about 20, 25, 30 kids and campers, or counselors, staff and kids. And I just remember this one time calling a kid, oh yeah, he hasn't registered yet, so I go to call him, and hey, is Adam there? And the guy who answers the phone says, nope, you've got the wrong number, and it was like, you've dialed 5941, you want 491, and he said, but what do you want Adam for? And so the guy told me he was a friend of Adam. So I said, I want Adam to come to camp. And he said, could I come to camp? Oh, sure, you can come to camp. So he came to camp. His brother, he has a twin. Of course, it's the whole, I wouldn't have money to come to camp, but I'd like to come. Okay, fair enough, you can come. But only come if my brother can come. Oh, sure, he can come too. And just a neat opportunity just to be able to share the gospel with these kids. And then they came to our youth groups. I think of one French family who came, and I mean, whenever I say French, I mean hardly spoke any English, and we hardly spoke any French. So it was an interesting week, but he got saved. This kid got saved on the 3rd day, just amazingly, gloriously saved. And the only Bible we could find to give him was a kid's picture Bible. He was probably 13, 14. And I kid you not, for the rest of that week of camp, he just had that kid's Bible open non-stop, just reading. And so it was kind of one of those where you're like, hey, this is not the time to be reading. You need to get, playing the camp games. And then you're like, hold on a second. I'm telling this kid off for reading the Bible instead of being part of the camp games. And so, like, it was just neat, the discoveries where he'd be like, he's alive, or, you know, just different things that as he would read through the kids' Bible stories in French, just how he would just keep coming to these discoveries and just be blurting out, no way, this is so exciting. And just to see him come to know the Lord and just to grow, and just to see some of those kids as you would leave them home, just the tears as they just did not want to go home. They would come up with all kinds of reasons to stay. Oh, I'll help, I'll wash dishes, I'll do anything to stay an extra week. And sometimes we tried to find ways to do it, sometimes we just couldn't. But just God really answered prayer, and just such a legacy. Just some of them have gone on well with the Lord, and we hear of their growth in the Lord, and just how, you know, they are doing well. Others, we keep praying for them, and so it was definitely a stressful camp, stressful 8 years of camp, because it was so laid back and money was never, there was never any money. But God always honored it, and God always used it. And so anyway, I'm going to be last one to share from the 4 pastors today. So we're just going to pray just for camp ministry. Obviously this year things are a bit up in the air, but we're going to be praying for our camps. I know it's not just these 2, but I just think in particular of Faith Mission Camp out of Falkland with Conan and Jelena and the team, and then of Sunnybray Camp up in the Shuswap with Tim and Kyle and the guys. So will you pray with me as we pray for our camps? Heavenly Father, I do want to thank you again for camp ministry. I want to thank you of the impact of camp in our lives, in my life. I want to thank you, Heavenly Father, just for your faithfulness in how you use camps for your glory. I'm just thankful, Lord, even for those who we heard about today who accepted Christ at camps. I'm thankful for the lessons that you've taught us at camps. And Lord, I just pray that you would just bless in our camp ministries. I think even of this year in particular with just COVID restrictions and the unknown of the summer. And I just pray for Tim and the directors up there and the board. And I think of Conan and the team and the directors out there. And Lord, it must be really hard making plans for the summer. And yet I just pray that you would just show them what does fruitful labor and ministry look like in these COVID times for camps. And so undertake for them, supply what they need financially, I pray, and bless them today, we would ask. Amen.